Hi friends, ever wonder if nuts are high in protein or are they high in fat? And did you know that just a handful of nuts contains 3 to 5 times more protein than your potato chips or Cheetos, even though they have roughly the same calories? Now, depending on the nut, they may even have more fat than potato chips and Cheetos. So are nuts really that healthy? Well, will they make you gain weight like chips or Cheetos? Or are nuts the key to longevity? So in this video, I want to show you why eating just a handful of nuts every morning, about this much, could be so powerful, especially when you're thinking about protein, amino acids, brain health, heart health, and weight. And of course, we're going to go through the top 10 nuts with the highest protein and talk about which one gives you good omega-3 fats, what their essential amino acids are doing for your body, and how to use nut butters without sabotaging your weight. And we'll also explore why not all nuts are good for you or your blood pressure is not what you think. So be sure to watch the whole video. Most people intuitively know that eating nuts are healthier than chips and Cheetos, right? But how can a simple handful of nuts make that much of a difference in your health? It doesn't look like much, does it? Now, did you know that in one of the longest running lifestyle studies in the world, people who ate nuts several times a week had dramatically fewer heart attacks and live longer than those who almost didn't eat any nuts? And remember, heart disease is the #1 thing that takes people out. And if you haven't guessed it, it was in the Adventist Health Study from Loma University, a blue zone community. They showed that eating nuts just 1 to 4 times per week lower the risk of non-fatal heart attacks by 74% and fatal coronary heart disease by about 73%. And if you ate more, so people who ate nuts 5 or more times per week, the risks of coronary heart disease stayed roughly half of that of low nut eaters, even after they adjusted for age, weight, smoking, exercise, and blood pressure. Now, isn't that fascinating? We aren't talking about a supplement or a drug, but these little tiny seeds that are packed with fiber, protein, and good fats for your health. They are little nutrient capsules that combine plant protein, fiber, unsaturated fats, minerals like magnesium and potassium, and antioxidant compounds like vitamin E and polyphenols. A typical ounce of nuts, about a small handful, roughly has 4 to 7 grams of protein, unsaturated fats, and almost no sugar. Now, from a protein standpoint, nuts are rich in amino acid, especially one called arginine, which your body uses to make nitric oxide, the gas that tells your blood vessels to relax. That's one of the reasons Loma researchers specifically highlight arginine as a mechanism by why nuts may improve arterial function and reduce plaque. Most nuts are slightly lower in lysine compared to animal protein, but when you combine them with beans, lentils, or whole grains over the course of an entire day, you will easily hit all 9 essential amino acids. One nut, pistachios, actually stands out as a complete protein with all 9 essential amino acids in meaningful amounts, which is impressive for a plant food. And when it comes to your heart, people who ate nuts 1 to 4 times a week had about 3/4 lower risk of non-fatal heart attacks and fatal coronary heart disease compared to people who rarely ate any nuts. And again, eating nuts 5 or more times a week still cuts heart risk about in half, even in older adults, people who smoke, people with higher body mass index, and those who exercise frequently. Why? Well, it's thought that the high poly and monounsaturated fat in nuts actually helps to lower LDL cholesterol. And the antioxidant vitamin E in nuts protects lipids from oxidation. And the higher arginine content, which boosts nitric oxide, well, that relaxes your cardiovascular system, your arteries. My parents love nuts. Amazingly, they had great heart function for most of their lives. And following over 80,000 adults for over 11 years, Loma found that those with the highest nut intake had roughly a 14% lower risk of dying from cardiovascular disease and a 19% lower risk of dying from ischemic heart disease. And we're talking about nuts like almonds, walnuts, and cashews, which gave about a 27% reduction in ischemic heart disease mortality. That's astonishing for something as simple as a snack. And of course, if you're allergic, then nuts won't be so healthy for you, right? So you don't want to force it. But for the rest of us, the benefit isn't just for our heart. They actually feed our brain. Now, Loma also measured brain waves, and they found that regular nut consumption actually strengthened EEG brainwave frequencies associated with cognition, healing, learning, memory, and other key brain functions. So maybe there's a new meaning to calling people nutty, huh? Pistachios actually produce the strongest gamma wave response. It's linked to high-level processing and information retention, while peanuts produce the highest delta response associated with deep sleep, healing, and immune function. And by the way, peanuts, they're one of the richest natural sources of PEA, polymethylethanolamide, which is one of the most fascinating compounds your body actually makes. It controls inflammation, pain, and cellular stress. Yet, I bet you most people have never heard of it. It belongs to a family of fatty acid molecules that act inside the endocannabinoid system. And that system is the same network that THC and CBD interact with. But PEE is produced by our own body, our own cells. And it works in a much more targeted, anti-inflammatory way. PEA is a fatty acid amide derived from palmitic acid. But unlike the dietary fat that gives palmitic acid its bad reputation, basically when you eat it in excess, it's pretty bad for you, PEA behaves more like a cellular signal or homeostasis molecule. Your immune cells release PEA in response to injury, chronic inflammation. Think of it as your body's built-in calm down molecule. It downregulates overactive immune cells, reduces mast cell degranulation, decreases neural inflammation, and modulates pain pathways. And it does this partly through PPAR alpha activation, a nuclear receptor that shuts off inflammatory gene expression, and partly by influencing the endocannabinoid tone. This brings us to the endocannabinoid system, which is a regulatory network that uses lipid messengers like anandamide, AEA, and 2-AG to balance mood, inflammation, pain, appetite, sleep, and immune activity. Now, PEA isn't an endocannabinoid itself, but it is considered an endocannabinoid-related mediator. So instead of directly activating CB1 and CB2 receptors like THC, PEA works by boosting the levels and actions of your natural endocannabinoids through what's called the entourage effect. By slowing the breakdown of anandamide, PEA indirectly increases its activity, which enhances pain relief, reduces anxiety, improves inflammatory control, and supports neuronal repair. Now, what makes PEA so clinically interesting is that it has been studied in nerve pain, such as sciatica, neuropathy, chronic pelvic pain, TMG, migraines, inflammatory bowel conditions, and even respiratory inflammation. And because it's produced naturally by the body, it has an unusually strong safety profile and extremely low toxicity, far safer than NSAIDs or chronic steroid use. And by the way, peanuts, they're not really nuts. They're actually legumes. However, a true nut is walnut, which in the study by Loma had the highest antioxidant concentration among the nuts tested. And even in older adults, when you add nuts like walnuts to their diet, about 50% of their daily calories, roughly 30 to 60 grams a day, for over 2 years, that appears to help delay their cognitive decline, and especially in those people with greater vascular risk. So when you put it all together with brain waves, a picture emerges about nuts, especially walnuts and pistachios. They're not just heart healthy, they're brain healthy too. Now, with that context, let's walk through the top 10 nuts by the amount of protein they have and what makes each of them special. And I'm going to include peanuts in here, even though they're botanically legumes, because nutritionally and in data sets, they show up alongside with nuts. So a typical 1 ounce serving of peanuts contains about 7.3 grams of protein, 14 grams of fat, and 161 calories. They're particularly rich in arginine and niacin, and they're a good source of magnesium, vitamin E, resveratrol-like polyphenols, especially when you eat them with that skin. The red skin is very nutritious. Don't throw that skin away. Once my son was making peanut butter, and he basically rolled these super duper delicious peanuts and took off all the skin and made peanut butter without the skin. I wasn't so pleased about that. Now, from a heart healthy standpoint, they're mostly monounsaturated fat, actually improves your LDL to HDL ratios. And from a weight standpoint, that peanut plus a fiber combination, it increases satiety. So peanuts and Loma brainwave studies produce actually the highest delta wave response, which is associated with deep sleep and immune restoration. The one caveat is that many peanut products are heavily salted or sugar coated. So if you're focusing on your cardiovascular health and weight, choose unsalted or lightly salted dry roasted peanuts without the added sugars. So honey roasted may taste great, but you may end up looking like a beehive. And unfortunately, old peanuts carry additional health risks. They may contain a toxin, actually a toxic fungus called aspergillus, and that aspergillus makes toxins called aflatoxins. So choosing peanuts with the lowest possible fungal contamination, especially without aflatoxins, comes down to where they're grown, how they're processed, and how you store them. So the biggest factor is the origin of the peanuts. My peanuts come from the US because it's grown in dry climates, and that's what you need to look for. In the United States, peanuts grow in Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. Dry climates also include Argentina and some parts of China. And the reason why you want to have a dry climate is because drier conditions don't promote mold growth. Aflatoxin is from Aspergillus, that's a mold. And so peanuts grown in warm, humid countries allow Aspergillus to thrive. The thing is, peanuts grow underground, which puts them at frequent contact with soil fungi, such as Aspergillus flavus and Aspergillus parasiticus. Now, in warm, humid conditions, especially in parts of Africa, Asia, and poorly regulated growing and storage conditions, these fungi basically produce a ton of aflatoxins. Aflatoxin B1 is most dangerous and strongly linked to liver cancer because it directly damages the DNA inside your liver cells. Peanuts are one of the highest risk foods for aflatoxins. Again, not because they're dirty, but because Aspergillus thrives in exact warm, moist conditions where peanuts are often grown and stored. So when the peanuts are harvested, if any of the nut is bruised, cracked, discolored, or shriveled, that's more likely to harbor fungal contamination. And peanut butter, unfortunately, can contain aflatoxins too, because processors may grind and mix lots of peanuts together, including some that would have been rejected in the whole form. Although in the US and most other regulated nations, peanut products are regularly tested to keep levels below safety threshold. And when you roast the peanuts, it reduces the aflatoxin levels somewhat, but not completely. So choosing peanuts grown in drier climates, such as the US, Argentina, or certain parts of China, dramatically will lower risk of collecting aflatoxins. And of course, buying peanuts from reputable brands with strict quality control, that also can help to reduce your aflatoxin accumulation. And when you store them at home, you want to store your peanuts and peanut butter in cool, dry conditions and use them within a reasonable time frame, like about 1 at max 2 months, to also minimize fungal growth. Organic certified producers, they typically screen batches more rigorously and reject peanuts with visible damage or partial mold contamination. And it helps to visually inspect your peanuts at home because it looks shriveled or has some kind of black parts to it, cracked, unhealthily soft, physically damaged. That will allow fungi to enter into the seed. So I try not to eat raw peanuts because when you roast them, it does reduce the total amount of aflatoxins in your food. And I prefer not to eat store-bought peanut butter. All you got to do is pour in a bunch of peanuts in a food processor or blender and keep blending it, and eventually it'll turn into peanut butter. But if you must buy peanut butter, choose brands that will test for aflatoxins. Many premium and organic brands will do that, even if they don't advertise it. You can always call the company and avoid low-cost brands that may, blend lower quality peanuts in your food. And ideally, I know in the bottle it may say don't refrigerate it, but you should refrigerate it or freeze that peanut butter because it still can grow aflatoxins if the peanuts have the fungi. And cold inhibits fungal growth.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
Another classic nut are almonds. About 30 grams, a serving of almonds provides about 6.3 grams of protein, 16.7 grams of fat, and 2.2 grams of fiber, and 184 calories, plus roughly 72 milligrams of calcium and 81 milligrams of magnesium and over 7 milligrams of vitamin E. So did you know that magnesium is really crucial for your insulin sensitivity as well as your muscle and nerve function? Don't eat the blanched almonds. You really want to eat the ones with the skin because the vitamin E and the flavonoids in that almond skin provide potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. And when we're concerned about amino acids, almonds, by the way, are rich in glutamate, leucine, and arginine. Think of them as plant protein that supports your muscle maintenance, your blood sugar regulation, and vascular health all at once. And almonds are one of the main tree nuts that show significantly lower ischemic heart disease mortality. vitality. Almonds are also excellent for your skin health, reducing wrinkling. Now, notice that there is one nut that looks completely different from other nuts. This nut is green. You guessed it, it's the pistachio. For a 30-gram serving, it provides about 6.1 grams of protein, 13.6 grams of fat, 3.1 grams of fiber, 169 calories, and roughly 308 milligrams of potassium. And among nuts, pistachios are often signaled out as having a near complete amino acid profile. It basically has all the 9 amino acids in significant amounts. That's why they're sometimes described as a complete plant protein. But the reality is all plants have all amino acids. They just vary in their ratios. And they are unusually rich in lutein zeaxanthin for your eye. Those compounds are literally embedded in the back of your eye. And of course, I mentioned potassium. They also have B6. They both support your blood pressure and brain function. Pistachios actually generated the greatest gamma wave response in the brain. Exactly the pattern you want if your goal is learning, memory, and high-level cognitive function. But one of the creamiest nuts commonly used for cooking for texture in sauces and soups is a cashew. That has 5.3 grams of protein per 30-gram serving, 14.5 grams of fat, and 172 calories. They are creamier because they're lower in fiber than almonds and pistachios, but they are an excellent source of magnesium, iron, and zinc, key minerals for your hemoglobin, your immune system, and hundreds of enzymatic reactions. Their amino acid profile makes them a great partner for legumes and grains in plant-based meals. And studies suggest that including cashews may help improve your blood lipid profiles and blood pressure, again, supporting your heart. My walnuts here are a bit lower in protein, about 4.4 grams per 30-gram serving, but it has 20.6 grams of fat and around 206 calories. But they do have a superpower, omega-3 fats. Walnuts are the only nut that is an excellent source of alpha-linoleic acid, the essential plant omega-3 fatty acid. 1 ounce of walnuts provides 2.5 grams of alpha-linolenic acid, which actually exceeds the adequate intake for adults, which is 1.1 grams per day for women and 1.6 grams per day for men. Now, omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid is incorporated into your cell membranes. It dampens inflammatory signals and is associated with lower cardiovascular risks. Walnuts are also among the most antioxidant-rich nuts with polyphenols that protect LDL from oxidation, and they seem to reduce colon and breast cancer risks in experimental models. Brazil nuts, they're technically not protein superstars, about 4.3 grams per 30 grams of serving. Not bad. They have 20.5 grams of fat, 205 calories, but they are micronutrient bombs. A 30-gram serving of Brazil nut has around 76 micrograms of selenium, often more than 100% of the daily requirements. Plus, it has magnesiums and some calcium. And selenium is a key component of antioxidant enzymes like your glutathione peroxidase, which protects your DNA and cell membranes from oxidative damage, and it also influences your thyroid hormones and your immune defense. And because they have so much selenium, it's so concentrated that you really only need to eat about 1 Brazil nut per week, and consuming more is not necessarily better, as it can push your selenium levels into excess. Amino acid-wise, they contribute to your overall pattern, but they're most valuable as an antioxidant selenium source, better than any supplement that you can take. Ever eat that chocolate hazelnut spread? What's it called? Something like Nutella? Well, most of Nutella is not hazelnut, but it's actually sugar. But if you actually ate real hazelnuts, it would provide 4.2 grams of protein, 19.1 grams of fat, and 195 grams in a 30-gram serving. And hazelnuts have a good amount of vitamin E and monosaturated fats. Now, their protein supports your muscle and tissue repair, and their fat profile, as well as their antioxidant content, appears to improve your blood lipids and reduce inflammation. Hazelnuts also show up in studies that improve vitamin E status in older adults, which is relevant because vitamin E protects neurons and may contribute to brain aging resilience. Now, pine nuts aren't top of mind for most people, but 30 grams provides about 4.2 grams of protein, 20.6 grams of fat, 206 calories, and a notable amount of magnesium and vitamin E. They bring polyunsaturated fat, mostly omega-6, but their polyphenols and vitamin E, that contributes to antioxidant protection. Now, as a protein source, they're best known for a flavorful accent in pesto, salads, and grain dishes, rather than primary protein anchor. Pine nuts are generally safe and nutritious, but there is one unusual syndrome that can happen. It's poorly understood, and it's nerve-related. It's called the pine nut syndrome or pine mouth. It's not dangerous, but it can feel alarming if you've never experienced it. Pine nut syndrome causes delayed, metallic, bitter, kind of chemical taste in your mouth that begins 24 to 48 hours after eating pine nuts. Now, the taste distortion can actually last several days to weeks, and for some people, it can disrupt your appetite because everything starts tasting metallic, even water. Now, this strange sensation is not an allergic reaction, and it's not a toxin, but instead it appears to be a temporary dysfunction of the taste nerve pathway, your cranial nerves like 8 and 9 and 10. It's triggered by some specific species of pine nuts. And researchers have noticed that the problem is almost always linked to two species. Pinus amandi, which is a lower quality pine nut from China, Pinus coreensis, which is less common. Now, these variations, they look similar to high quality Mediterranean pine nuts, but they're cheaper and often mixed into bulk commercial batches. So chemical analysis, they do suggest that these species contain abnormal fatty acids that irritate your taste receptor cells, or it can cause a brief disruption in the nerve signaling from your tongue to your brain. Now, importantly, pine nut syndrome doesn't cause permanent nerve damage, and there are no known long-term consequences. Most cases resolve in 7 to 14 days, and symptoms, they gradually fade and taste buds regenerate and the nerve signaling resets. Unfortunately, there is no known treatment, just supportive care and waiting it out. Now, the best way to avoid it is to choose your pine nuts carefully. Choose the ones from Mediterranean or Korea in origin, such as Pinus pinea, which is Mediterranean Italian, and Pinus sabrica, which is Siberian. These high-quality pine nuts, they are not commonly associated with pine mouth syndrome. Now, they are more expensive, but they are safer. Just avoid those cheap bulk pine nuts with unknown origins because they may include the Pinus amandi, which, will give you this pine mouth syndrome. And when you get your pine nuts, refrigerate or freeze your pine nuts to prevent oxidation, which will give them a really bad taste, even if you don't get that pine mouth syndrome. Have you ever tried some pecan pie? Pecans give you about 2.5 grams of protein, 21 grams of fat, and 207 calories per 30 gram serving. They are lower in protein, but they're extremely rich in monounsaturated fat. That's probably why they taste so good, as well as plant sterols that help lower your LDL cholesterol. Plus, it's a good source of zinc and antioxidant polyphenols. From a heart standpoint, they're pretty heart healthy, especially when they replace other refined snacks like your chips or Cheetos or processed meats. And in cohort studies with trinas, they appear to decrease ischemic heart disease mortality. Now, the amino acid contribution is modest. It's super important to support tissue repair and enzyme function. When I went to Hawaii last time, I found bags of macadamia nuts at Costco. And they are so famous for their macadamia nuts, but unfortunately, they are low in protein, about 2.4 grams, but they have 22.7 grams of fat per 30 gram serving. It's mostly monounsaturated fat, similar to olive oil. They are dense, they are buttery, with heart-healthy fat profile that improve your LDL cholesterol, as well as endothelial function in your vessels. They're an excellent way to swap out saturated fats from pastries and processed snacks. They are great for your heart. So what about nut butters? And this is where many people accidentally fall off the cliff. Nut butters are essentially nuts that have been pre-chewed for you before you eat it. Have you ever watched birds feed their baby chicks and how they regurgitate food out? That's kind of a nut butter. 2 tablespoons of almond, peanuts, cashew butter easily provides 180 to 210 calories, 14 to 18 grams of fat, 6 to 8 grams of protein. And inherently by itself, it's not bad. It can actually be helpful for people who want to gain weight, gain calories, athletes, or those with poor appetite that can't eat a lot of volume. Now, the problem comes when you're eating it often, you're eating it in excess, and you're pairing it with spreadable other oils and sugars. Because frankly, many commercial nut butters, they add palm oil, hydrogenated oils, or extra sweeteners. It turns pretty much a whole protein, high fiber food closer to a cup of frosting. So if your goal is weight loss or metabolic health, from a safety perspective, you're much better off chewing some nuts because that controls how much food you swallow. So much easier to eat the same calories spread on bread than overeat that. So this is why if you're trying to lose weight, treat nut butters like a condiment. They're not supposed to be their own food group. And you can put them on your apple slices or cereal whole grain toast, but make sure you read the ingredient. Eating a spoonful is very different than eating half a jar with a spoon. Okay, oftentimes people love salt in nuts. So I have to say a quick word about sodium because it's so easy to overlook. Now, in a day, generally speaking, we're supposed to eat less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium, preferably we should all be eating less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium as added sodium, especially for people with high blood pressure or heart disease or blood vessel problems. So it's best to eat plain unsalted nuts because naturally there is some sodium in it, but it's so little compared to when you switch to salted nuts. And then the sodium content actually can leap up in bounds, right? Many salted products, they contain about 95 to 100 trillion milligrams of sodium per ounce. Some heavily salted, dry roasted peanuts can reach to 230 milligrams per ounce. So if you're eating multiple ounces a day, watching a movie or like riding in your car, you may be quietly adding several hundred milligrams of sodium without even realizing it. And that's not even counting the sodium you get from meals. For most people, aiming at an ideal sodium target, I consider under 140 milligrams per serving, is a low sodium snack. But honestly, I would prefer the default to be unsalted. And if you really need flavor, sprinkle some spices. Because when you zoom out, nuts are one of those rare foods that sit at the intersection of protein, healthy fat, fiber, and a ton of other micronutrients that also have been shown to have strong human outcome data. And simply by adding just a handful of nuts per week, variety is best. That is associated with fewer heart attacks and longer life. Isn't that impressive? Now, nuts even has been shown to affect our brainwave patterns. Now, the only real downside of nuts is that they are energy dense, and that can be a sodium trap because so many people heavily salt and overconsume sodium when they eat nuts. If you want to learn how sodium affects your health, watch the next video.